Hello and welcome everybody to week 5 of the Functional Effect Health Optimization Group. I am Coach Sarah, and it is always really great to be here with you. Whether you are tuning in live or you are tuning in on the replay, over the past few weeks, we have been talking about awareness, we've been talking about goals, we've been talking about identity, values, and learning how to take action even when things aren't going perfectly. And if you've been with me for this last month of meeting on Thursday nights, there is a very real likelihood that life has happened somewhere along the way, um, and it has affected your ability to show up in the exact way that you want to. So, what we're going to be talking about tonight, sorry, I'm just muting real quick. What we're going to be talking about tonight is what happens after that moment. Maybe it's a busy week that threw you off. Maybe stress took over and derailed you. Maybe you missed a few days and suddenly you're at this place where you feel like you've fallen off track. That's what we're talking about tonight. It's the aftermath of that moment, not the action of falling off, but what happens after. And the reason why we're attacking this tonight is because this is where most people get stuck. It's not in knowing what to do. It's not in having the tools to be able to do it. And it's not because they're not able to make progress, but it's because they think they have to start over to move the needle forward. That's what we're going to unpack tonight. This conversation is going to be all about learning how to get back on track without the lens of punishment, without the feelings of shame and guilt, and without burning yourself out in the process. Because let's face it, myself included, I have definitely put myself in this position where I have not followed through with the thing that I said I was going to do and put myself into this place where I felt like I had to start over. And for all of us, most of us that are watching this right now, this is why starting over doesn't work. Starting over doesn't work because starting over usually means that we end up going to the extremes. We end up overcorrecting. We end up being stricter than we were before we went off track. And we end up trying to do more than before. And oftentimes, the reason why we weren't able to stay on track in the first place is because we were already overwhelmed. And when you're trying to overcorrect, do more, and be stricter, you are setting yourself up for exhaustion, resentment, and another cycle of failure. And the only reason that I know this is because I've done this to myself. I've watched clients do it to themselves, but trust me when I say that I don't come here speaking from a place of just being a coach. I also come to you speaking from the place of being a fellow human being and understanding what it's like to have that kind of a challenge in the feeling of letting yourself down and then wildly overcorrecting. It's unnecessary and you don't need a restart. What you realistically need to focus on establishing for yourself is the idea of creating a re-entry. What does that re-entry look like for you when you've fallen off track? So in order to dissect that out, we have to really get down to our mindset around starting over and the concept of drift versus failure. So what we think of the process of having an off week, as oftentimes we think of it as failure, right? We think of it as completely falling off the wagon. You get an F as a grade, you are doomed to fail. When in all reality, when you've had an off week, an off weekend, an off day, an off meal, what we need to look at that as is drift. And drift is life happening. It's not a permission slip to not follow the plan. And I want to be clear with that that's not what I'm suggesting. But drift And the reality of life happening and us sometimes being in a place where we have gone over our capacity to show up as the person that we want to show up as oftentimes results in high achievers turning these small blips of time of being off track into big problems that derail them completely. Missing a few days is not falling off. It's being human. So I'm here to tell you that perfection, while perfection is not necessary to see extremely awesome progress, enough consistency is required to see progress. And so what we need to really focus in on, especially when we're going through seasons when stress may be higher or our demands may be higher, is working on establishing a baseline framework. And what that baseline framework does is when you get off track and when you aren't following the plan to the best of your ability, it allows you to reestablish what I refer to as the minimum effective dose of wellness that gets you back to your personal baseline. And there's going to be a 3-step process that I want you to work on establishing to get yourself back to said baseline. And it's going to be the PRR method, PER. We're going to pause, we're going to re-anchor ourselves, and we're going to resume. And I'll explain this in just a second. So the PRR framework, when we pause, it's not to pause and shame ourselves or pause and guilt ourselves or pause and notice what a failure we are. What the pause is for is to examine what actually happened that derailed us. What is the truth of the why we drifted away from the plan? It's not about giving yourself an excuse. It's not about writing yourself a permission slip, but it's about examining the situation for truth. I didn't make enough time in my schedule. I didn't prepare my meals and have food on hand that was suitable for what I'm trying to do. I got too busy and said yes to too many things this week, and my personal self-care fell off because of that. That is what I mean by pausing. It's examining what actually happened that caused the derail. No blame, no spiral, just observation. So we talked about this idea of observation a few weeks back with like thinking of that fishbowl like approach of looking above yourself and examining the situation for details and facts versus injecting emotion, which we can be really good at when it comes to fitness and nutrition stuff, versus looking at what it is that is causing us to be derailed, not how we feel about it. The second part of this framework is the re-anchor. And the re-anchor is something that you've already done if you've been hanging out with me for the last month, because the re-anchor involves reestablishing your identity. Who am I becoming? Who do I want to be? What does that version of me do? How does she show up? And then your values. What matters here? What matters to you? What kind of person do you desire to be? And are your actions aligning with that? And the third part of this framework is the resume, which is choosing a baseline habit and then utilizing it in the minimum effective dose to bring yourself back to where you're feeling like you are getting back to the version of yourself you want to become. So an example of this is not working out for a week. That's a really easy one for people to get caught up in. So didn't work out for a week, completely fell off track. You got really busy. You were maybe babysitting your grandkids, or your kiddos got really busy with their activities and you were chauffeuring nonstop and just did not have time to get your workouts in. Resume with getting steps is one way to look at it through the lens of a minimum effective dose. So how can you get back to getting in your walks or your steps versus working on resuming a full program? Or maybe it's going back to your program, and if you were towards the end of your program and doing 3 sets of everything, maybe you come back to the beginning and you just do 1 set of everything and resume the same program that you were on versus feeling like you have to start over with a new one. You do not have to start over. You just have to scale back and bring it down to a level that allows you to show up again. So baseline is not bare minimum. Baseline is your foundation. So I encourage each of you, because it's going to look different for everybody. What does that baseline look like for you? So I want to do a quick check-in here. And again, feel free to comment in the chat or just take this in for yourself. But I want you to reflect on a couple questions tonight for me. One, when I feel off track, what do I usually do? So when you feel like you've gone off track, what is your typical response? Do you swing wildly back in the other direction and go hyper strict? Do you overcorrect and go over the top and maybe even like restrict? Or do you give up and go for a longer period of going off the rails before you pick back up again? There's a lot of different responses to people falling off track that I've seen through my years as a coach, but those are some of the common ones. Second question that I have for you is, what would returning to baseline look like for you? Now, there's no right answer to this. This could be a combination of getting in your steps, creating a balanced plate, utilizing hand portion sizes again if you feel like you've gone overboard with your eating or maybe are overeating or overindulging. It might be getting back on track with your hydration and making sure that you're getting to bed at a specific time and following a bedtime routine. There's a lot of different potential possibilities here for what baseline looks like, but I encourage you to examine the areas of hydration, sleep, physical activity, nutrition, and stress reduction. Those are the big areas for me that I feel like deserve attention when it comes to what is your bare minimum. And at Functional Effect, we call that the big 5. So when you're thinking about what does my baseline look like, looking through that lens of those big 5 metrics and determining what your bare minimum looks like, that's one of the goals that I have for all of you after you have watched this call or you've been here with me tonight live. And 3, what is one familiar habit that I could work on resuming this week personally? Maybe something that you've fallen off track with, maybe something that you have been doing, but not doing as frequently or consistently as you want to be. What does that look like for you to do something one bite better, like what we talked about last week in last week's call, versus the idea of showing up perfectly? What does it look like for you to resume that habit imperfectly? I encourage you to explore those questions for yourself, because the answers are going to point you in the right direction to where you need to go next with your own personal wellness journey. So another couple things that I wanted to talk to you guys about is just the mindset that we have about starting over. And I encourage you to think about and even come up with one word that describes how starting over feels for you, because that is going to give you really good insight into your mindset around starting over, whether you're accepting of it, whether you are highly critical and harsh around it, whether you're writing yourself a permission slip to do it repeatedly, there's a lot to be said about examining your own perspective around starting over, um, and understanding what that baseline looks like for you so that when you get put in a position where you do need to start over, that you can work on avoiding that gut reaction, because the reaction that you have to failure is also a habit. And it's worth examining and looking at, not just it's your response to failure, usually within lots of different areas of your life, not just within fitness and nutrition. So I encourage you all to examine what your personal mindset around failure feels like and looks like, and work on redefining that with creating that baseline set of habits and knowing that getting off track does not mean that you need a restart, but rather just this reentry. And the reentry is those baseline habits, and you build back from there. So I want to leave you with this. Consistency is it's about never drifting. Isn't about never drifting, rather. It's about knowing how to come back from the drift without turning the return from the drift into a big production. You don't need to punish yourself in order to make incredibly awesome progress. You don't need to prove anything to anyone in the process of getting healthy. And you don't need to start over from scratch if you find yourself off track. You just need to return to what supports you again and again and again and again, because life's going to happen. And progress lives in the return. I thank you all for being here as always. And next week, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be shifting from the internal work to external design, which I'm really excited about. We're going to be talking about how your environment either supports or sabotages your progress. And we're going to be talking about how to make your goals easier instead of harder. Because willpower isn't the answer, systems are. So we're going to be talking about how to build your own personal system and what that does for your consistency, for your results, and what it does just overall for the effectiveness in anything that you apply this framework to. So as always, thank you so much for being here with me. I look forward to being here with you next week. We are going to be shifting the time slightly earlier, so keep your eyes peeled for a message from me. We're going to be going just a little bit earlier, but as always, we will be recording the call and sending out that recording to everyone. So thank you all for being here. And as always, remember, you deserve to feel your best. Until next time, see you later.